four last things that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks: death, judgment, heaven, purgatory, kind of goes together, and then hell. They comprise a body of teaching within the church that's given the title eschatology. Now, eschatology is about the last things, which is often associated with the final judgment. And the premier study of eschatology you'll find in the book of Revelation. However, as you read through the catechism on death and judgment, as you read through the catechism on eschatology directly, you'll also see that it's about the last things for you and for me. Those final hours that really help us come clear with the measure by which our lives have been led. And so the end times, yes, it's about the final judgment, but the study of eschatology about the end times is about the study of our own lives. And it's about a reasoned, real, loving understanding of what it is and who it is we are. So, as I've already mentioned, this week we're going to look at death and judgment in particular, and next week we're going to consider heaven/purgatory and hell. First of all, we need to look at what it is we're talking about. We're talking about the end of the existence of a human person. As a human being, first of all, we have to understand we have a temporal existence, an existence here on this created earth, and we have an eternal existence. Now, it turns out that we're living our eternal existence simultaneously with our temporal existence. That spirit which animates us, that identifies who we are, that God breathed into us upon our being formed in our mother's womb, is with us always. And while we're here on earth, is absolutely inseparable. What death does is temporarily break that link. So what we need to remember is, as a human being, by God's word, we're created in his image and likeness. So we have within us the image of God. So as a foundation, we're imago Dei, the image of God. And we need to remember that. And it's to God that we are to return. That is the end of our existence. That is the purpose. I'm using the word end as meaning the purpose of our existence. So, again, we have two sort of existences. We have two periods in our life. First of all, we need to remember that this temporal existence here on earth is very much the shortest. Yet, it has the most import in our overall existence. It's here where we decide where we're going to spend eternity. In our temporal existence, here on earth, well, number one, we're dust from dust. It is just that. Right now, in this experience of our physicality, this body will end. Right now, we have a limited ability to experience our existence. We're really limited to the five senses. Many, however, who grow in the spiritual life will ascribe that sixth sense, that sense of God, that knowledge of God. But from the physical standpoint, we have five senses by which we experience our existence. On this earth, in our temporal existence, we have a limited ability to know, a limited ability to understand, to perceive. And if you doubt that comment, just think about, very simply, the relationship between men and women. How well do you really get that, right? We have a pretty tough time grasping what's going on in our existence, okay? And frankly, we have a limited ability to endure. We don't really like it when it's too cold or too hot or too loud Or if we're exposed to certain chemicals, we don't care for it, and on and on and on. And so our physical existence provides certain boundaries in which we don't live fully. Okay? However, our eternal existence, when we experience the fullness of our life, that is, at the final judgments when our bodies are joined together with our spirit and we have our glorified bodies, that will be a profound experience. I can't speak to that. Don't know what that looks like apart from our studying of Jesus. So we can look at it a little bit, but that's not what I want to focus on right now. What I want to focus on is, as we look at our eternal existence, we begin to see what our spirit is meant to be and which we will be when our body does encounter, oh brother, death. Well, number one, we'll be ephemeral as God is ephemeral, which means that we're unbounded. We're not limited. We're capable of being totally free in our expression and our existence of who God created our spirit to be. And an example of that and a sustaining argument for that is look at the saints. Look at those that experience mystical union with God. They were able to live for years literally without eating because they had food that you do not know about that comes from my Father, as Jesus would say. They were able to exist apart from the temporal boundaries on their body because they engage their spirit. We will also have an unlimited ability to know. That is, we will know He who created us in the fullness of our knowledge and in the fullness of His knowledge. We will be able to encounter God perfectly as God allows us to encounter Him. And we will have that unlimited ability to endure. The temporal boundaries of our body will no longer limit us to know and experience not only God, but each other. We will live in wonderful and perfect relationship with all those who have preceded us. So then, let's look at death, the first of the last four things. Well, the first thing that we consider when we look at death is that it's really breaking the link that God created between the unique human body and the unique human soul that He has given us. And that will be ours for eternity. The body will be in a glorified or resurrected body in the final days, or at the end of, in the final judgment. But for now, it's that breaking of the link. We become separated for a time. Okay? It's a place where most of us are filled with a great deal of doubt. Because really, we have one prime example of what death will bode for us. And I don't know about you, but I know that when I consider Jesus' response to death, I somehow can't separate His divinity, having coming back from the dead, from His humanity. So for Him returning from the dead, His resurrected body, I don't grasp that. And so I still have a small amount of anxiety about death. But everything I read, everything I'm told, all the saints, all the church's teaching, fills me with great hope that it's not death that this breaking of link is, but rather the entry into glorious life. So death is the end of this earthly existence, this temporal existence. But it's not the end. It's really the beginning of the longest part of our existence. Death, unfortunately, is the consequence of sin. God never intended for the body to be separated from the soul. God never intended for that. Sin, however, created a barrier between us. We would have been immune from death we would have been immune from the physical breaking of the link had that not happened. However, not only does Christ redeem us from sin, but death is transformed. It is no longer a permanent barrier. It is no longer a shattering of the link forever, but rather it is postponed until the final judgment. Death has great meaning, because in our physical death, we die to our sinful behavior, we die to our imperfections, and we gain Christ, who precedes us in death. In death, God calls us to himself. It's a summons. It's a plea for us to yield to a God whose love is so profound that he would sacrifice himself. Death is the end of a pilgrimage. I don't think there's a man in this room or a person seeing this video that won't admit that this life that you've journeyed hasn't been filled with its struggles, hasn't been filled with its pain. Upon physical death, that pain ends. Death is a fulfillment of the baptismal promises that the church provides to us on that day when original sin was washed from our souls. It is an experience of the fullness of God's promises for us. It's an assertion, it's a certainty that God is truthful in what he says he's going to do. Death requires some thoughtful preparation. As the Jews prepared for God's work to free them while being in bondage to Egypt, they had to prepare for the Passover and slaughter the lamb and gird their loins and take their meal standing and prepare the lamb and eat the lamb. As all of that had to happen for the Jews, so too it is for us. We must prepare for this final breaking of the link. We must come face to face with our humanity. We must work at freeing ourselves from the bondages to our free will and those barriers that separate us from our most intimate relationship with God. So it takes some significant preparation. The really cool thing is we have so many examples to consider. The Church's magisterium has for us Lives of the Saints, in which we can see folks who have lived really grace-filled lives. That's not to imply necessarily that you and I are going to have the same kind of life as Teresa of Lisieux. Our vocation is to raise our families and to love our children and grandchildren, and to love our wives, and to serve one another. It is certainly a different call. But the fact is that that opportunity provides us the ability to become holier day by day than we are today. In fact, one of the ancient prayers that the saints give us in the Litany of the Saints says, "From a sudden and unforeseen death, deliver us, O Lord." And as you pray the Hail Mary, what do you say? "And intercede for us at the hour of our death." And in the Church's liturgy, we're entrusted to the patronage of St. Joseph, the patron of a happy death. Guys, I guess the point is this isn't meant to be a morbid topic. It really isn't. This is about what we're going to do for the bulk of our eternity. 80 years over infinity is a minuscule number. But these 80 or 90 years make the point and select the path that we're going to live that bulk of our eternity. It is really the essence of what this spiritual life is all about. And so important is it, we need to know that we don't travel alone. Holy Mother Church, from the beginning of our existence until our very end of life, is with us to journey there, to teach us how it is we are to live and what it is we are to do if we want to achieve that which is called holiness, that which is called separation from the world, from sin, and live with God and in God. Mother Church is there for us to understand and walk with us so that we can be the eternal being that God always intended for us to be. So what she teaches and what she tells us we ought to do is intended for us to encounter God in the richness and fullness of who he is, and of equal importance in the fullness of who we are created to be. And finally, physical death, it's the last act of humble submission to the plan of God for human existence. Yes, he never intended for physical death to be our end, but now that sin has entered the world, it is indeed his plan. And so, as it were, if we submit ourselves with a spirit of understanding and yearning for an intimate, eternal relationship with God, then our submission is, as it were, our own Passover. So then, what happens after death? What, frankly, is happening even now? There are two judgments that we will participate in. There will be the particular judgment, the judgment which we'll spend the most of the time talking about, and then there's the final judgment, that which occurs at the end of time. But first, let us consider our judgment, our particular judgment. Number one, it finalizes the decisions and actions of our lives. It, as it were, solidifies our choices. Made the point again and again. Where do you want to spend eternity? The bulk of your existence. Our particular judgment is tied to the sacramental life of the church. In the sacrament of reconciliation, we're drawn to newness of life in Christ each time we participate, and we allow the priest to say te absolvum. Every time we participate in the Eucharist, we're freed from our venial sins, and our souls are made anew. If we're not in the state of mortal sin, we're fresh, clean, and new, ready to meet God in his fullness. We're definitely tied to that in the sacrament of baptism, where original sin is washed away and we're made ready to enter a life of beautiful and wonderful existence with God. Our particular judgment is tied very specifically to our response to God's call and grace in our own lives. It's particular. How did you love? How did I love? Did I call on God's grace and live with that grace in mind and heart? Did I yield to God when he called upon me? Did I call upon the saints and ask them to journey with me? For I am a weak and lowly man who needs the assistance of others in my journey. It's immediate. As soon as you die, you will be adjudged. And either you will enter into the blessedness of heaven, or through a step of purification immediately, or immediate and everlasting damnation. It has been the teaching of the church for these 2 centuries. These 2 millennia, excuse me. However, in the mission of Christ, our particular judgment is based on the justice and mercy of God. If you and I cry out to God for his help and assistance, if we cry out for the blood of the Lamb, if we cry out that we have called upon that Lamb and sought to live our lives along his way, then God's mercy overwhelms the justice which we so totally deserve, that we will be embraced into the kingdom. And then as we consider the end of the whole process of the particular judgment at the end of time, it is absolutely universal in exposure. All things at this moment are not fully subjected to Christ. There are still factions in the world that rebel against him, but at the end, every knee shall bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. When Christ does come back on that judgment day, triumph of good over evil will be made known in our presence, and the goats will be separated from the lambs. The tares will be separated from the wheat. That will occur. We're part of that journey by our very existence. In the end, the secret dispositions of our hearts will be made known. It won't be hidden any longer. And so the call to seek after purity of heart and mind and spirit. But wonderfully, in the beauty of God and in the wonder of truth, we will encounter God in his fullness. We will encounter reality in a way that's beyond our conception here. We will know what is, not what we perceive, not what we think it is, not what grace has thus far taught us, but that which is in its fullness, we will know. And finally, the last message of the last judgment is that God is saying to us, today is the acceptable day. Frankly, each day is the acceptable day of salvation. We need his help for our future planning, for the bulk of our eternity. When that hit me, I just can't absolutely get it out of my head. 80 divided by infinity is such a teeny number. What are you looking for? So then, what's our response? Everyone in this room or watching this video is going to die. How do you want to handle it? Do you want to handle it by preparing for the inevitable? Seeking out God's grace and his mercy in your temporal existence, reforming your ways if there are ways within you that need to be reformed? Or do you want to deny it and presume? Again, this is not a morbid subject. It's about planning wisely and well for your eternity. It's about planning wisely and well for my eternity, the bulk of my existence. Secondly, no one travels this journey alone. You and I who live in this community, at the very least, have this community of men that we're participating in. We have our parish community. We have our diocesan community, all within the context of Holy Mother Church, who presents to us and prepares for us a place where we can encounter Christ in a personal and loving way. the sacraments of reconciliation and Eucharist at this point in our lives. We don't have to journey alone. And thirdly, everyone in this room or watching this video will be judged by God. By God who chose to ransom us from our miserable, sinful condition. Are you assessing your life? Am I assessing my life daily to see if I merit God's justice? Or am I assessing my life claiming God's mercy?
So behold the Lamb who was slain.